Of the peoples who would come to inhabit the land of Arda, there was none as ancient, as powerful, and as fair as the Elves. They were the first to awaken in Middle-earth, the firstborn of the long-awaited children of Ilúvatar. The peoples that the Valar had spent eons shaping the earth in preparation for. And at long last, their time has finally come. Hello everyone, and welcome to part 4 of my series covering the history of Arda as told in the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. In part 1, we talked about the creation of Arda as well as the Valar and Maiar who stepped into it. And as part of that, we also talked about the fall of Melkor, one of the greatest of the Valar, now turned devil, against the will of Ilúvatar and the Valar. And in part 2, we talked about the beginning of days, the spring of Arda, and the destruction brought to Middle-earth by Melkor. A destruction so great that the Valar fled and built their own paradise in Valinor, which would come to be the Ageless Realm. And in the last video, we talked about the story of Aule and Yavanna, the creation of the dwarves, and a marital dispute that bled into the very fabric of creation itself. And if you haven't watched those videos yet, I absolutely recommend doing that first, because these videos kind of build on each other. And so some of the stuff I'm talking about might be confusing without that prior knowledge. And so I have the playlist linked in the description, and it might even pop up in the corner there if I think of it. But today we dive into chapter 3 of the Quenta Silmarillion, and the tale of the awakening of the Elves and the captivity of Melkor. I'm very excited to get into it, and if you enjoy this video as well as the other videos of the series, then consider liking the videos and subscribing for more. This is an ongoing series, and I hope that you will stick around for the journey. And apparently the YouTube algorithm really enjoys when people like the video currently, so any help in that way is very much appreciated. So with that said, thank you so much for watching, and let's get into it. When last we left our heroes, the Valar had built a paradise for themselves in the land of Valinor. And as part of that, they built a city for themselves, and they called it Valimar. And just outside the gates of Valinor is where Yavanna sung into being the 2 trees of Valinor, Telperion and Lorelin. And these trees have an innate divine light that covers the entire land in this holy gold and silver light. But the great lanterns, Illuin and Ormal, that had been toppled by Melkor, were never replaced. And so while Valinor was in this bright divine paradise, Middle-earth existed at this time in a forever twilight. And during this time, the Valar seldom visited the land of Middle-earth, save for 2. Yavanna often wandered the land of Middle-earth, grieving for her creation that was destroyed. And she cast a sleep over many of the things of the land so that they would not age until the damage of Melkor had at last been put right. And Oromë the Hunter often traveled the lands of Middle-earth with his hunting bands, his teams of beasts and Maiar spirits who would join him in the Great Hunt. They would continue to hunt and kill the abominable beasts that Melkor had twisted and corrupted. And all this time, Melkor continued building his own strength from his fortress of Utumno in the north. And all spirits that he had corrupted to his evil purposes were gathered to him. And among these spirits were some of the very first that Melkor had corrupted to his evil. And they became most like to Melkor in their corruption. Their hearts were as fire, and darkness became their garments. And a cloud of terror went out before them. In the later ages of Middle-earth, these would become known as the Balrogs, the oldest and greatest of all the servants of Melkor. And many other monsters Melkor bred in that time, and his darkness continued to seep out of Utumno, covering the whole of the earth. I should say Middle-earth specifically. Valinor is largely safe from all of this. And Melkor never forgot about that, and always he was prepared for the inevitable attack of the Valar. and he constructed a great stronghold in the northwest of Middle-earth underneath the Iron Mountains. This fortress he named Angband, and it was commanded by his chiefest and greatest lieutenant, as well as one of the most powerful Maiar in his service, a spirit by the name of Sauron. Yavanna and Oromë see the darkness that is spreading across Middle-earth, and they retreat back to Valinor to seek counsel with the other Valar. Yavanna is sure now that the children of Ilúvatar are almost here, and she cannot bear the idea of leaving them in darkness while they dwell in essentially heaven on earth. Surely Melkor would find them first and just kill them, or otherwise mutate and corrupt them as he did the beasts of the earth, corrupting them into the worshippers that he had craved since the very beginning. Tulkas, for one, is more than happy to just go and wage war right now. He is ready to go. But at the behest of Manwë, the king of all the Valar and the first king of Arda, at his command the Valar Mandos speaks up. All the way back in creation, just after the Ainulindale, the Song of Creation, Ilúvatar had shown all of the Ainur a vision of the history of Arda, essentially a big time-lapse of the whole history of Middle-earth. And so that vision, combined with each one's understanding of their part of the melody that created the universe, gives them a level of prescience or foreknowledge of the future. But not everything is revealed to them. Each only comprehends a part of the greater whole. But it is clear from the few times that he does speak up that Mandos knows quite a great deal more about the future of Arda than any of the other Valar. He can see much of what is to come, and with far more clarity than any of the other Valar. And he says that the time of the children of Ilúvatar is indeed fast approaching. And according to him, it is fated that the elves shall awaken in the starlight before ever being allowed to comprehend the daylight. And thus they will ever praise and call out to Varda the Starbringer, wife to Manwë and Lady of Light. And speaking of Varda, it's time for her to work her magic. Then Varda went forth from the council, and she looked out from the height of Taniquetil and beheld the darkness of Middle-earth beneath the innumerable stars, faint and far. Then she began a great labor, greatest of all the works of the Valar since their coming into Arda. She took the silver dews from the vats of Telperion, and therewith she made new stars, and brighter against the coming of the firstborn. She gathers drops of dew from silver Telperion, and enacts what the elves view as the greatest of the creations of Arda. On the height of Taniquetil, she creates the greatest and brightest of all the stars in the night sky, even arranging them into the first constellations. And in the north, she creates one last constellation, the symbol of the Valar, presented in the north as a direct threat against Melkor. And in the very moment that Varda finished this act of creation, the elves at last awoke in Middle-earth. The children of Ilúvatar is a term that refers to both elves and men, for each were the direct creation of Ilúvatar without any interference from the Ainur. But the elves were the firstborn and the wisest, for they were the first to awaken, and they were long-lived. And in the twilight of Middle-earth, under this newborn starlight, on the shores of the island sea called Helkar, the very first of the elves awoke. And this place was called Cuivienen, the Waters of Awakening. Waking from the sleep of Ilúvatar, the first thing that the elves comprehended was the starlight. And so ever afterwards, the elves loved and revered Varda most above all the Valar. Cuivienen and the Sea of Helkar existed in the far east of Middle-earth, likely in the lands to the east which is called Rhûn, or if not, even further east. And this sea was formed by the toppling of Ilúin, one of the great pillars that had the lamps set atop it in the spring of Arda. Cuivienen is now a land that is lost forever to the elves, but it is still regarded as the first elvenhome, the original elvenhome. And for untold years, the elves existed staying in this realm of Cuivienen, and they developed their own language to describe themselves and the world around them. And they called themselves the Quendi, which signified that they were the only creatures in the land that spoke with their own voices. And to avoid future confusion, I am going to be keeping tracks of the many names of the many groups of elves on this handy-dandy whiteboard. Because trust me, things are about to get very complicated, but for now it is just the Quendi, the umbrella term used for all elves everywhere. But the elves did not initially dwell in a perfect paradise, because while the land of Cuivienen was beautiful, Middle-earth was still largely left under the dominion of Melkor. Many elves who went wandering off into the woods were never seen again, either dragged off or killed by the beasts and followers of Melkor. And some of the oldest songs that are still sung by the elves speak of dark shapes in the woods, or the ones that blot out the stars above. They also sang of a powerful dark rider, one who pursued and devoured elves atop his horse. This last fear specifically was planted in the Quendi by Melkor himself. And the reasons why will make sense in a second here. Because of all the Valar, the first to discover the elves at Cuivienen was Oromë, a great rider of immense power. He saw this new creation and knew that it was the children of Ilúvatar, and instantly he was filled with love for them. However, the elves saw him and were terrified, thinking that this was the fabled rider who killed elves and ate their souls or other horrible things. Melkor hated Oromë, and so he had somehow spread these superstitions among the Quendi in order to make them fear Oromë when they would see him, hoping that the Quendi would ultimately shun Oromë. And initially it worked. Many of the Quendi fled in terror at the sight of Oromë. Yet the wisest and noblest among the elves realized that he was no monster, and they perceived in his face the light of the two trees. Now obviously they didn't know about the two trees at this point. This is more just saying Oromë's face shone with a divine light, and the elves recognized it and saw that it was not malicious. And these elves, not fearing Oromë, instead approached him. But all is not entirely well in this wholesome scene, because in this moment we also get a brief description of what may have happened to the elves who were taken by Melkor. And it's not pretty. But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor, little is known for a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Utumno, or has explored the darkness of the councils of Melkor? Yet it is held true by the wise of Erisea that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Utumno was broken were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the Orcs, in envy and mockery of the Elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the Orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Ilúvatar, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make, since his rebellion in the Ainulindale before the beginning, so say the wise. And deep in their hearts the Orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This, it may be, was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Ilúvatar. It is said that those of the Quendi who were captured by Melkor were imprisoned, and through some unspeakable, abominable evil were twisted and warped into the very first of the Orcs. Melkor wished to be God, yet without the power of Ilúvatar, without the flame imperishable, he was incapable of creating his own minions, his own worshippers. And so what he did instead was distort and pervert something that had been made perfect. And this is how the Elves and the Orcs became eternal rivals. The Orcs hate and fear their master Melkor, yet they serve him because it is their only purpose. And this single act by Melkor was most hateful in the mind of Ilúvatar. The torture and corruption of the fairest of all Eru's creations. But now back to the sweet, wholesome meeting of the Valar and the Elves. For a while, Oromë stayed with the Quendi, but he greatly desired to travel across the sea and tell the Valar that the Quendi are awoken. And so he left, and this council was of such great importance that even Ulmo attended. He told the other Valar of the Quendi and of the shadows that had tormented them since their awakening. And the Valar began to debate the best course of action, but while they did so, Oromë immediately returned back to them, desiring to dwell longer with this new creation out of a love for them, but also out of a sense of duty. He wanted to protect them. And as the Valar debated, Manwë ascended Taniquetil and sought counsel from Ilúvatar, and eventually he came back down to render his judgment. For he had received instruction from Ilúvatar himself. The Valar were once again to take up mastery over all of Arda and deliver the Quendi from Melkor no matter what the cost. And so the Valar crossed the sea in full strength to attack Melkor, an attack that he would never forget. Their forces met in the northwest, and the land broke underneath them. Melkor's armies retreated to Utumno in fear of the absolute wrath of the Valar. And the Valar set guards at Cuivianen to protect the Elves from this great war that was waging. Then the Valar passed over Middle-earth, and they set a guard over Cuivianen, and thereafter the Quendi knew nothing of the great battle of the powers, save that the earth shook and groaned beneath them, and the waters were moved, and in the north there were lights as of many fires. Long and grievous was the siege of Utumno, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which naught but the rumor is known to the Elves. In that time the shape of Middle-earth was changed, and the great sea that sundered it from Aman grew wide and deep, and it broke in upon the coasts, and made a deep gulf to the southward. Imagine this for a moment from the Elves' perspective. They have only just discovered the existence of the Valar, the great powers of the world that are clearly above them in the cosmic pecking order. And their very first impression of them is in their full wrath and might, a might that shakes the land underneath them and rends the earth asunder. So fierce was the battle at the gates of Utumno that the geography of Middle-earth was forever changed, and the stretches of sea between Middle-earth and Aman grew even wider, and the lands of the north about Utumno were made completely desolate. And for millennia afterwards, they would remain thus. If you look at the handy-dandy map of Middle-earth at the time of the Third Age, notice how the north has absolutely nothing in it? Yeah, the Valar were angry. But finally, the gates of Utumno were broken, and Melkor hid himself in the deepest, darkest pit of his fortress. But Tulkas ran after him and wrestled him to the ground. He was then bound in chains forged by Aule himself and led out of Utumno as their prisoner. Yet in their haste, the Valar did not search every pit, every hall in Utumno, and many evil things escaped their sight. Among these was Sauron. They never found him. But Melkor was brought back to Valinor, and he was placed in the Ring of Doom, where the Valar hold their council. He begged for leniency, but his brother Manwë did not grant it. Melkor was locked in a prison deep within the halls of Mandos, to be imprisoned there for 3 ages until he could again petition for leniency. And then came the decision of what to do with the Quendi. Ulmo, for one, was of the opinion that they should be allowed to exist in Middle-earth and do whatever it is they will. And some of the Valar agreed with him. But most of them were enamored by the beauty of the Elves and feared what would happen to them if they were left alone in this place. And these Valar desired to have fellowship and kinship with the Quendi. At last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers in the light of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence, saying, "So it is doomed." From this summons came many woes that afterwards befell. Foreshadowing is a literary device used, but ultimately they do make the decision to bring the Quendi to Valinor. And even though there is a bit of an ominous statement made at the end, Mandos says that it is fated that these events should pass. But initially, the Quendi did not want to leave. The only interaction that they have had with the Valar thus far, save for Oromë, was in their wrath, and so they are very reasonably terrified of the Valar. Imagine you're just expected to trust this higher being, but the only interactions you've ever had with this being is seeing them decimate 1,000 worlds. Yeah, my finger would be on the nuke button. They only trusted Oromë, who had befriended them first. And so Oromë was sent to persuade them. Oromë chose from among the Quendi 3 ambassadors who would be brought to Valinor and bring back a report of what they saw. And these 3 ambassadors would become the first 3 elf lords. And their names were Ingwë, Finwë, and Elwë. And they are very important, so remember them. Ingwë, Finwë, and Elwë were brought to Valinor, and they were awestruck at its sheer beauty and light. And they especially loved the light of the 2 trees. And with that, they were brought back to Cuivianen, and they told the elves of the beauty of Valinor and of the light of the trees. And it's not said in this passage, but the light of the trees does change them. Whether it changes them metaphysically or purely just their appearance is unknown, at least to me. I'm still working through the Silmarillion myself, but it is made very clear that elves who have seen the light of the 2 trees are forever changed by it. To use an example from the Third Age, think of Legolas as your archetypical elf who has not seen the light of the 2 trees. He still has immortality, he is still made fair after the children of Ilúvatar, but he is what you would consider a normal, baseline elf. And compare that to Galadriel, who has seen the light of the 2 trees. And that light is ever reflected on her face, her form always appearing to contain an inner light. This is a divine light that she was bathed in from birth. So yeah, these 3 elf lords, they come back to the Quendi at Cuivianen, and they are transformed. They are made more fair, more divine by their encounter with the trees. And they attempt to call the elves west to Valinor, to persuade them to join them. And thus began the Sundering of the Elves, and the return of the whiteboard that we mentioned earlier. Many of the elves did decide to follow the 3 elf lords and join them in following Oromë. This included all of the kindred of Ingwë, along with most of the kindred of Finwë and Elwë. And those who decided to make this journey westward were called the Eldar. Eldar was also the name that Oromë first gave the elves, the Quendi, when he saw them. It means the people of the stars. But there were some who refused the call, preferring the stars and the trees to the promises of Valinor. And the ones who refused the call of the Valar were known as the Avari, meaning the unwilling. They remained in Middle-earth, and the Eldar and the Avari did not meet again until ages passed. And here's where we really start digging into the many groups of elves, how they keep branching off into their own groups. So again, we're going to be using the handy-dandy whiteboard diagram. So we have the 3 ambassadors who would become lords of the elves, Ingwë, Finwë, and Elwë. Their kindred comprise all of elvendom, the Quendi. And the Quendi divide into the Eldar and the Avari, the ones who take up the call and the ones who refuse the call. The Eldar decide to follow Oromë, and they are made up of all of the kindred of Ingwë and most of the kindred of Finwë and Elwë. But the Avari, made up of the remainder of Finwë and Elwë's kindred, refuse the call. And from there, the Eldar are even further divided. And I actually talked about these next groups in a previous video. The kindred of Ingwë, highest and greatest of all the elf lords, became the Vanyar elves. They were most beloved by Manwë and Varda, and the Vanyar elves would sing songs and create these great works of poetry and verse for them. They were the first to leave Middle-earth, and hardly any men have ever seen a Vanyar elf. The next to leave are the people of Finwë, and they would become the Noldor elves. They were most beloved by Aule, who taught them his love and knowledge of craftsmanship. And the final and largest group of elves to leave Cuivianen were the kindred of Elwë, the Teleri elves. In fact, their host was so great that they actually had two rulers, Elwë and his brother Olwë. They were the last to leave because the Teleri elves were the most hesitant of the Eldar in regards to answering the call. And speaking of the sea, the Teleri elves eventually fall in love with the sea, and ever they listened to the music of Ulmo that is ever present in the waters. They didn't have a kinship with Ulmo in the same way that Aule and the Noldor elves do, but they still learned much from listening to the music of Ulmo. And that was reflected back in their own music, which had a quality to it, a sadness to it, that the other elves just did not have. The Vanyar and the Noldor elves all made it across the sea to Valinor, but only some of the Teleri actually attempted the crossing. And the elves who made it to Valinor, consisting of the Vanyar, the Noldor, and some of the Teleri, are collectively known as the Calaquendi, the Elves of Light. So now we have the Calaquendi, the elves who make it to Valinor, the Teleri elves who set out for Valinor but changed their minds, and the Avari who never left in the first place. And the name given to the Teleri elves who do not make the crossing is the Umanyar. In other words, the Eldar who were not of Aman. And the collective name given to the Umanyar and the Avari, the two groups of elves that never made it to Valinor, are the Moriquendi, the Elves of Darkness. Not to say that they're dark in an evil sense, they just literally live in a realm of eternal twilight, at least at the current time. I hope that all makes sense. Hopefully the diagram I'm doing throughout this video makes any sense. But now we are back to the mass migration of the Eldar. Beginning from the first elvenhome of Cuivianen, they began their travel into the northwest regions of Middle-earth. And they were being led by Oromë atop his mighty steed Nahar. And as they journeyed, they passed near to the place where the Valar had uprooted the earth in their Siege of Utumno. And smoke was still burning throughout that land, blotting out the stars, and the elves were afraid. Many of the elves in their terror turned back, and we literally have no idea what happened to them. The story simply says they are forgotten. Whether they all died out there, whether they were turned into orcs, or whether they simply rejoined to the Avari, I have no idea. But the journey westward was slow, for the elves were in awe of the entire world around them as they walked. And sometimes Oromë would depart on urgent business, and during that time the elves would simply remain where they were, content to wait for Oromë and just appreciate the land around them until they carried on. And in their years of journeying, they went through a forest until finally they came to a river. And it is said in the histories of the elves that this was the River Anduin. By the Third Age of Middle-earth, the River Anduin is one of the most recognizable landmarks in all of Middle-earth. It begins in the mountains of the Ered Mithrin and continues southward. It's fed by many arteries coming off of the Misty Mountains, including the enchanted waters of the Entwash, passing through forests like Mirkwood and Fangorn, as well as lands like Lothlorien and famous landmarks like the Argonath, before of course passing through the realm of Gondor and flowing out into the sea. And of course, the general course of the river and the lands around it have likely changed significantly from the First Age to the Third Age, because the First Age does officially start with the awakening of the elves. But it's cool to see that from the very beginnings of Middle-earth, the River Anduin has been there, and it has seen it all. And there were mountains beyond the river that they called the Hethaiglir, or the Towers of Mist. As you may have guessed, these are the Misty Mountains, though in these older days they were far taller and far more imposing than they were in the Third Age. According to the Silmarillion, these mountains, both tall and terrible, were actually raised by Melkor in order to hinder the movements of Oromë throughout Middle-earth. Now at this time, the Teleri elves actually dwelled on the east bank of the river Anduin, while the rest had already crossed into the west. There was a lot of elves making this mass migration, and so they kind of took it in stages, one group at a time. And when Oromë came to lead the Eldar over the mountains, the Teleri actually remained for a time. And from the Teleri, an elf named Lenwë decided he no longer wanted to cross the Misty Mountains and continue on this journey. And so he and a host of the Teleri actually split off from the rest of the Teleri and journeyed southward along the banks of Anduin. This group became known as the Nandor Elves. And of all the elves, their knowledge of living things, from the plants of the earth to the beasts that walk it, became the greatest of all their kin. And eventually, Lenwë's son, named Denethor, not that Denethor, obviously, a different Denethor, led some of the Nandor elves across the Misty Mountains to join their kin in the lands of Beleriand, and we'll get to that later. And by later, I mean in like 2 seconds. While the Teleri delayed, the Vanyar and the Noldor crossed over the Misty Mountains. I don't necessarily know that they crossed over. They passed through the Misty Mountains, by some means. And they eventually come to a land called Beleriand. But where on earth is Beleriand? And to understand that, let's consult a map of Middle-earth in the Third Age. The westernmost region of the continent of Middle-earth is a realm known to the elves as Eriador. It is bordered by the Sundering Sea on the west and the Misty Mountains on the east. The Misty Mountains basically divide the continent of Middle-earth in half down the middle. The Grey Havens, the Shire, Rivendell, all of these locations are in the realm of Eriador. But for the purposes of this video, the main feature that I want to point out of the realm of Eriador, as it pertains to the land of Beleriand, is this mountain range in the west here, specifically this one, the Ered Luin, also known as the Blue Mountains. Now let's take a quick look at a map of the land of Beleriand, if I can. It's in a bit of an unreachable spot, but we're gonna make it work. This is a map of the lands of Beleriand, and it's in a bit of an inaccessible part of my office, so you're on your own for this one. Beleriand was a land to the north and west of what we think of as Middle-earth at the time of the Third Age. And to see exactly where, remember the mountain range, the Ered Luin, from the map of Middle-earth? Well, that's it right there. This mountain range right here. That is the Ered Luin, the very same mountain range. Beleriand is a land in the far northwest of Middle-earth that bordered the land of Eriador. Now you might be wondering where on earth Beleriand is in the Third Age. I am sure that's not going to be a canon event for elves everywhere. All right, back to me in the chair, which is just over there. But Oromë led the Vanyar and the Noldor elves into the lands of Beleriand before going across the sea himself to seek the advice of Manwë on just how on earth he's supposed to get presumably tens of thousands of elves across the Sundering Sea. And for their part, the elves saw this seemingly endless sea, and very much like indie director Markiplier, were very terrified of it. Vaguely gesture at the Iron Lung poster behind me. They retreated into the mountains and forests of Beleriand, fearing the ocean. And eventually all of the Teleri minus the Nandor elves make it as well, so they're all in Beleriand now. And they were so hasty because Elwë did not want to miss the crossing into Valinor. Very ironic considering the next video in this series, but we'll get to that. But now all of the Eldar minus the Nandor elves have made it to Beleriand, and all are ready to make the crossing to Valinor, the Undying Lands. And that is where the story of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor comes to an end. We have learned now, at least in some part, of the Sundering of the Elves, and I hope that I explained it in a way that made sense. And most importantly for the chapters going forward, we have been introduced to 3 primary groups: the Vanyar Elves, the Noldor Elves, and the Teleri Elves. And of course their leaders, Ingwë, Finwë, and Elwë. The latter of whom will be very important in the next video as we talk about the story of the elf lord Thingol and how he fell in love with a literal angel. But for now, this is where this video comes to an end. And so thank you so much for watching this video through to the end, and if you enjoyed it, then feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we are going to be going through the Silmarillion chapter by chapter in the months going forward. And comment if you have any Lord of the Rings related topics you want me to do a deep dive into. I can do lore videos on characters, places. I'm kind of steeped in the Tolkien lore right now. I'm in my Tolkien era. As a matter of fact, I have a couple Tolkien related lore videos that I'm working on right now that I'm in the writing stages on. But if you have any topics you want me to talk about specifically, leave them in the comments below. I mean, aside from the Silmarillion series going forward, that's just happening. And I know I've talked about it in the last few videos, but we have recently passed 12,000 subscribers and we're still going strong, which is incredible to me. Thank you all so much for enjoying my videos and wanting to stick around. I always know when the algorithm is pushing one of my older, more viewed videos, because I've been getting a lot of comments on my Portrait of God video that I did years ago now, and I can always tell it's getting pushed in the algorithm again because I'll see an upsurge in comments on that video, and I believe it's a contender for one of my most viewed videos. For a while my Shin Godzilla video was like indisputable, but now I think Portrait of God is catching up. So thank you for enjoying that video, and I hope that you stick around for all the various videos that I have cooking. And if you came because of my Portrait of God video, don't worry, you will be eating good this Halloween season. I will make sure of it. But also we will be continuing this series as I dive deep into the Tolkien lore because I'm having fun. I'm having a lot of fun. And by the time you're watching this, I will have also seen Nolan's adaptation of the Odyssey. I'm going to see it this Friday in the IMAX theater. I'm so excited. And if you're interested in the Odyssey, I did a massive video on this channel about Homer's Odyssey. I read it, and it's a great video. I would say it is one of my best videos on the channel. I dive deep into the story itself, the mythology surrounding it, the historical and cultural ties that are mentioned in the book itself. I would consider it my definitive work on Homer's Odyssey, though there is a lot more that I have been stewing on in recent months that I may or may not make a video on. More thoughts that I have as I learn more and more about this ancient story, but I still think that video holds up as my definitive work on Homer's Odyssey. And I'm sure I'll let you guys know in the future what my thoughts are on Nolan's Odyssey. But personally, I'm looking forward to it. I've seen all the promo material, all the trailers and stuff, and it's only made me more excited. But I'm gonna see the movie for myself, and we will see what I think about it after the fact. But personally, I am very excited going into this. And of course, a huge thank you goes out to my patrons, Sean, Happy the Knife, and the top tier patrons, RD and Snowy. Thank you so much for sticking around, for supporting my videos, and supporting my dream of maybe doing this full-time one day. And if you also want to see your name listed at the end of these videos, as well as getting ad-free access to all of my videos, then consider joining the Patreon. The specific rewards for each tier are outlined on the page, but all paying members of the Patreon get credit in my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time for Chapter 4 and the story of Thingol and Melian. I hope that you're excited for that because I know that I am. And cut.